Good morning and welcome to the 2020 edition of the Eastern Oregon Operators Conference. My name is George Murgel. I am a former academic. I've been in the field for a total of some 40 years, both on the consulting side and as an academic at Boise State and at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, teaching water and wastewater design and treatment. Our topic, sewer system management planning, is a tool which can be used for developing and keeping track of the information necessary to keep your systems up to date. Obviously, you won't be able to ask any questions as we go along, but there will be provision for that at the end in order to get in touch with me or to review some additional links to information that would be useful. HECO Engineers was founded in 1982. We've been appointed engineer for 9 cities and 2 counties in Idaho and Oregon. We've completed work for over 18 national park units, as illustrated in this figure of all the different parks around the western part of the United States. As a company, we've got over 30 years of experience and knowledge in wastewater repair and rehabilitation projects. And as noted personally, I've worked in the field for well over 40 years at this point in time. Now, when you're talking about a sewer system management plan, one of the first things that probably needs to come to mind is the concept of planning. Planning is kind of illustrated in this phrase by Alan Lakin, who's a well-known author on personal time management. And that is, planning is bringing the future into the present so that you can do something about it now. That's a pretty reasonable consideration when you think about SSMPs. The performance of many collection systems is typically considered to be poor. Many systems have received minimal maintenance over the years. Records oftentimes can be very spotty. Public work departments typically are not only responsible for sewer systems and for the treatment facilities, but they also have other functions related. Their attention is divided between streets and sidewalks, storm drains, and even water utility maintenance. The money that gets spent in a particular municipality is typically where the ratepayer can see the results. In sewer systems, usually it's an out of sight, out of mind consideration. Now, a sewer system management plan can be defined in a number of ways. It is a living document that describes the activities that your agency ought to be using to manage your wastewater collection system effectively. Now, this effective management can include things like monitoring and improving the system condition, cost effectiveness to minimize your infiltration and inflow, and minimizing the number and types of sanitary sewer overflows, or SSOs. The document generally is your vehicle to keep your system up to date and running efficiently. And if you can set this document up in such a way that you can reduce the SSOs and your I&I, or infiltration and inflow, then the cost of your system should also be, being able to run your system should also be reduced. Collection systems are the last major wastewater component that has yet to receive any type of regulation on the national level. The federal government has developed and unpublished some draft regulations. Originally in 1995, EPA convened an Urban Wet Weather Flows Advisory Committee and a Sewer System Overflow SSO Committee. Both of the committees included municipal representatives, advocacy groups, states, and representatives from EPA. On May 29th, 1999, President Clinton had directed EPA to improve the protection of public health at our nation's beaches by developing within a year some strong national regulation to prevent the over 40,000 annual sanitary sewer overflows from contaminating the nation's beaches. At that point in time, Carol Browner, the EPA administrator at the time, had signed a proposed SSO rule in January of 2001. The incoming Bush administration, however, withdrew that signed proposal indicating they want to do some further review on it and further study before it was able to be officially published in the Federal Register for comment. As a consequence, no other regulations have ever been proposed. So from 2001 to date, there are no regulations related to infiltration inflow and sewer system overflows. And so this has left many agencies and groups to pretty much formulate their own plans and go it alone. Now, California in 2006 was the first major entity of any sort that decided that they needed to implement something on their own in order to deal with sewer system overflows. And so the California State Water Resources Control Board on May 2nd of 2006 put together a waste discharge requirement permit to regulate your sanitary system, sanitary sewer systems. Their permit required public sewer collection system agencies to develop a sewer system management plan. And they have to be self-audited at least every 2 years and updated every 5 years. Now, what does this mean for Oregon? Well, probably not much in the context of a required entity, but it is something that is very possible that it could be required in the future. That being said, the fact that this tool exists makes it very beneficial and has been very beneficial for those agencies in California that have adopted it and have implemented it. Now, when you think of a sewer system management plan, there are 10 essential elements listed here: goals, your organization, legal authority, your operation and maintenance program, design and performance provisions, overflow emergency response plans, your FOG, your fats, oils, and grease control program, system evaluation, monitoring, and communications. Some of these items may already be present in any given municipality. The likelihood that all of them are present is hard to gauge at this point in time. But the idea of the sewer system management plan is putting and pulling together all of these different elements into a single document that can be, as I mentioned, a living document that can be updated periodically, that allows you to coordinate these elements in a single plan and use what you've got, and then only have to worry about updating and producing what is necessary to make it complete. So when we talk about goals for a sewer system management plan, the plan is includes a schedule that would allow the municipality to properly manage, operate, and maintain. It will also help reduce and prevent and mitigate your sewer system overflows, and it will implement programs for your infrastructure repairs, your fats, oils, and grease controls, and for the public outreach. This goal then is really to help develop an accurate database that will allow you to determine and prioritize your major needs based upon the data that you have acquired. It should help you highlight the needs, special needs that you might have within your system, be able to prioritize what really needs to be dealt with immediately and what could be monitored and put off for a later time. It also should help reflect in your performance, your safety, and your levels of service, and how you implement the various resources that you would direct toward dealing with the sewer system. Now, an SSMP identifies at a minimum the names of responsible staff, other representatives that you would help implement, manage, and update your sewer system management plan, names and numbers for the people and parties that would need to respond to your sewer system overflows, and the chain of communication for reporting sewer system overflows. Many of you hopefully have some kind of a phone call list in your offices that would detail all of these items. And in this day and age, with the advent of the smartphones, hopefully some of you have even adapted that so that you have that list on your phones. You never know when you need out in the field that you need to get a hold of somebody because of some problem that is being observed or has developed. But the key thing is having all that information in one particular location. Putting together some kind of an organization chart to include in here that would visually detail who you contact and what the chain of command is would be very, very important. Key among that, of course, is keeping it updated. One of the things to keep in mind is obviously, as people come and go, personnel turnover, hopefully your list has been updated and you keep a current list of who you need to contact when you need to contact that person. The Overflow or Emergency Response Plan is something that is a standalone document that typically would be summarized in the SSMP and updated as needed to reflect staffing or notification requirements. Your notification, procedures, staff, contractor personnel, who you would need to contact, and whether or not what type of training is necessary. The response, of course, is your program to ensure what will happen if you do have an overflow. What are your reporting procedures to ensure that the notification goes out to the appropriate regulatory agencies, as well as any other potentially affected entities. And of course, impact mitigation. What happens, how do you contain the overflow? How do you prevent any potential discharge that would adversely affect people, waterways, or other individuals? The plan does not need to be organized specifically into these sections, but it must address all of these components. And usually that's left up to the municipality in terms of how they put together any specific plan. One of the key things in many municipalities is whether or not you're planning for FOG, which is fats, oils, and greases. Many of our systems in this region, of course, are not anywhere as big as you would see in these pictures. The thing to think about is the concept of a Fatberg. London, a while back, had a accumulation of fats, oils, and greases in their mainline sewer system that was about 66 feet long, and it cost several $100,000 to remove. And of course, in this particular case, you've got a brick-lined sewer, as shown here, and the lucky or unlucky individual had to get down there and literally shovel it out and haul it out of the sewer by hand. Now, I realize, of course, that the City of London is slightly larger than any of the municipalities in this part of the world, but London had to spend almost $2 million a month clearing buildups of fats, oils, and greases in their system. This is an expense that obviously has to be planned for and should be one of the top items on their SSMP, assuming they have one, to be able to ensure that they can adequately handle these once they are developed and are brought to somebody's attention that they exist within the system. Now, the fats, oils, and grease program normally should include the following as appropriate. Certainly you must identify sewer sections that would be subject to FOG blockages. And of course you need a plan and schedule for how you would dispose of that particular buildup once it is identified. What kind of legal authority can you employ in order to prohibit discharges? Not only restaurants could be a source of these fats and oils and greases buildups. Individual homes could also be a source. So you have to have the ability to be able to somehow identify the measures that would prevent them from occurring and to deal with them once they do. This would include having design standards, requirements to install grease removal devices, authority to inspect grease producing facilities to make sure that they're complying. You have the development and implementation of source control measures and plan and schedule for public education and outreach. Communication is going to be, as you noticed in the list, is the 10th item in the list, but oftentimes communication is key to every of the other 9 elements, including fats, oils, and grease programs. If this is something that you have not had a problem with, then the development of the program document may not be that critical. But if you've had fog buildups in the past, making sure that you have all of these components in your program to be able to deal with that becomes a very critical issue. Now, legal authority is one of the big issues here. The SSMP doesn't give you the legal authority, but in and of itself, but it should help outline what your authority is and give guidance in terms of how you should progress toward covering options in the future. Now, the SSMP should demonstrate a number of things. Of course, how to prevent the illicit discharges into the sanitary sewer system. It should require sewers and connectors to be properly designed and constructed. There should be access for maintenance, inspection, and repairs, limiting the discharge of fats, oils, and greases, and some sort of an enforcement action that could be taken against violators of any particular sewer ordinances. All of these different components then would have the basis for your legal authority to be able to deal with those issues. The O&M program that you would have within the SSMP normally would include a number of things. Some kind of an up-to-date map of the sewer system, a prioritized schedule and log of regular maintenance and cleaning activities, your developed rehab and replacement plan, staff training requirements, and equipment and replacement inventories. Not only having a map of the system, but the procedures for updating them becomes a very critical component. The rehab and replacement plan must have adequate resources identified for the O&M and repair that can be done on an ongoing basis. So this requires you to have some idea of what it's cost to make repairs or to do updates in the past so that you can project into the future, and also to have some idea of how much you need to do at any given point in time. Funding, of course, is what's going to be critical in order to make this system functional. Now, your design and performance provisions typically are related to some kind of a minimum design and construction standard and specifications for rehab and repair of the system. There should also be procedures and standards for inspecting and testing segments of your sewer system so that you can ensure that if you do have a problem, you can figure out what the problem is to know what type of repair or rehab activity is necessary. The inspection and testing, of course, is critical to make sure that your standards which you have used for the design and construction are in fact actually being followed. When you accept the test for the gravity sewers, for example, you can do low pressure air testing or water testing to identify leak reach. And there are other techniques that can be employed. There are a number of requirements that are determined at the state level, which you can access to implement as your provisions. There are national recognized sets of standards that are typically also followed. These are typically referred to as the 10 state standards developed by the 10 states around the Great Lakes, but have generally been either utilized directly or by indirect reference in many systems throughout the country. Now, capacity management for any given system relates, you need to have some kind of a planning tool to be able to figure out what the capacity is currently, and based upon rates of growth, what kind of future capacity is necessary. This can require some kind of a modeling, possibly, to evaluate sewer system overflow discharges, how that relates to any hydraulic deficiencies within your system, and in fact, what may be causing them. The process would allow you to undertake and evaluate the appropriate design criteria to make sure that either what has been implemented in the past is in fact meeting those standards, or if not, it allows you to plan for how you update them and upgrade those facilities to meet those standards in the future. You also have to have flow monitoring, so that at many places within the system, so that you can handle and determine whether or not you can expand the system to handle new flows as growth occurs. Some parts of the country, this becomes a very critical issue as growth is occurring at very high levels at this point in time. And in other parts of the country where people are moving from, becomes an issue in that, okay, you've got all of this capacity that is now no longer needed because you've had a lot of people move out. Is that in and of itself going to cause some problems? Capital improvement plans are your means of trying to implement and prepare a cost assessment of what is necessary for your system. The different assessment tools that you have basically relate to a life cycle where you initially determine what your requirements are, what projects can handle those particular needs, what are your funding sources and streams, what timelines are you having to deal with. Is it something that needs to be done immediately? Is it something that can be planned for over the next couple of years or even more longer term? And then you publish these in some kind of a list so that you can generate interest to be able to get these projects actually done. Now, this is a list that oftentimes needs to be reviewed on a fairly regular basis so that you can update it as projects get completed, would move off the list. Other areas within the system, maybe new projects would develop and would need to be put onto the list and prioritized so that you always have some kind of an idea of what you need to do on an immediate basis, what you need to do on a short-term basis, maybe 1 to 5 years, and what could be put off in a much longer term, say 10 to 20 years. Now, your monitoring, measurement, and modifications to your system, the particular agency would need to maintain some kind of a database where they would establish and prioritize the SSMP activities. They would also identify and illustrate the sewer system overflow trends, including some of the frequency, location, and volume that have occurred in the past, if they have, give some idea of what likely could happen in the future. There would also be pursuit of regular monitoring, keeping an eye on the system, implementing effectiveness of each element in the sewer system management plan, so that any problems that have occurred can be dealt with and hopefully mitigated. You also have to access the preventive maintenance program, keeping track of how successful it actually is. If it isn't being successful, then you need to essentially go back in and tweak it so that you improve its performance. And you also have to update program elements based upon your monitoring performance evaluations that you would implement to gather the data necessary to see the overall effectiveness of your planning. Now, having implemented a plan, you typically have to review that plan on some kind of a regular basis. So your overall agency should look at periodic internal audits that are appropriate to the size of your system and the number of sewer system overflows that have occurred. At a minimum, you probably need an audit every 2 years, and you must develop some kind of a report. Now, whether this is done in-house or whether you would have an external agency do this for you really is up to each particular municipality. But in any event, the plan needs to be reviewed, needs to be audited. You need to keep track of what has happened and whether or not what you indicated has been effective. Now, the focus typically is on the compliance and with the requirements that have been identified, and in the end, provide some kind of a summary of what revisions may be necessary to improve the overall sewer system management plan and the attainment of the ultimate goals that have been espoused from the beginning for that particular municipality. Now, as I noted, the last element is your communications program. The agency has to communicate on a regular basis with the public on aspects of the development, the implementation, and the performance of the SSMP. The public needs to be aware of what you are doing to keep the system functioning for their benefit. Now, this process could allow the public an opportunity to provide input to the agency. They would have a chance maybe to review drafts of the plans that have been developed and implemented and the results of the implementation of the plan so that they can provide additional input. Any given plan is only as good as the input that has been received. The enrollee needs to create a plan of communication with systems that are of benefit to the overall goal of the plan, that would be provide input to the agency so that they can revise the plan as necessary. And communication is a two-way street, so having the public provide input, you providing information to them, keeps everybody in the know in terms of implementing your plan. With the public buy-in to the plan, it generally is going to be much easier to make the plan effective for the system. Now let's look at a couple of case studies, a couple of examples, kind of illustrate how sewer system management plans have been important. This is a picture of Fort Mason at the Golden Gate National Rec Area. And this facility is indicative of many National Park Service facilities. In general, advancement for operators in the parks has usually been moving to some other more involved or complex treatment system. And as such, records of how to deal with problems or issues at any particular location, which have not probably been kept as diligently as is desired, goes the knowledge of those places or problem locations goes with the operator when he moves to the next facility. So the new people coming in may be able to observe the current state of the equipment, the condition of the equipment, but areas that may have had problems, which if they have not been dealt with, no longer is there any institutional knowledge. The idea of putting together a sewer system management plan which would document these sorts of problems or issues and keeping the documentation on the upkeep of the equipment would become very important in being able to ensure that they will be able to handle problems as they would occur over time. In this particular project, this is a map from 1961 that was made available to us when we began the Fort Mason study. This was one of the few documents that they had that had any indication of how the system was supposedly put together. There are no other current documents. If there have been any changes since 1961 when the original system was installed. And unfortunately, this is symptomatic of not only the Park Service in different locations, but there are municipalities that are probably in a similar situation. They may have a document available from the original implementation of the system, but there are not sufficient records or detailed records of any changes or modifications that occurred in the interim. In the preparation and implementation of a sewer system management plan, then, noting that it is a living document ensures that over time the document is updated. Changes, corrections, additions are added into the system, and then when you get the changeover in personnel, you have a record of what has happened before to help you plan for what needs to be done in the future. In another park, Muir Woods National Monument in California, the implementation of completing a sewer system management plan, it had been determined that the existing systems, which consisted of 2 different lift stations at 2 different locations within the monument, really needed to be consolidated into a single newer station. Both of the original stations were from the early 80s in terms of implementation or construction, and with the growth in the system and the condition of the system, both needed to be replaced by a single new lift station. The sewer system management plan, the study essentially allowed for determining where would be the best location to place that new lift station, how big it needed to be, how it needed to be upgraded to deal with the existing components within the system. And so this provided the framework, which then allowed the park to go out and secure what funding it needed to basically construct that and actually implement that construction here in the very recent past. Point Bonita is also located in the Golden Gate National Rec area, and in this particular situation, when the sewer system management plan was developed for this location, it was determined that the wet well, which was a fiberglass structure, had a large crack in it that was allowing groundwater essentially to leak into the system. Wastewater from the system is not generally treated at this location, but is piped several miles away through a combination of lift stations and the gravity sewer system, collection system, to a treatment facility past the Marin headlands. It was also noticed that the main line going from the lift station was not properly sized for the area. So the implementation of that sewer system management plan provided the necessary details and documentation as to how to best improve the system to ensure that the collection of the waste would be done in an efficient manner and in a very cost-effective manner. In this particular case, in the analysis of the Point Bonita system, it was determined that there had been a significant number of deferred maintenance opportunities associated with the wet well and with many other components in the collection and pumping system. There also was no real record drawings of the septic and holding tanks available that would feed into the collection system. So there were a lot of aspects of the system where there was no records or no indications of where to even find some of the various components. The records of any existing utilities also were not kept very current or up to date. So trying to locate if you needed to do some replacement or work in the ground, knowing whether or not you had any water lines, any electric lines, gas lines, there were insufficient records kept for those utilities. And again, this is not uncommon for many, especially some of the smaller utilities, smaller municipalities, where record keeping has not been a high priority, or with the turnover of personnel, where that person knew every problem area, every issue within the system. When he's gone without a written record, there's no way of knowing or really capturing very well if and when you need to worry about particular aspects of your system. These questions in terms of how you then update and replace the system, what kind of cost estimates you need, become very critical issues that had to be considered. Now, when you think about the sewer system management plan, of course, California led the way with the requirements for sewer system management plan preparation. Many of the available resources and references that they have used are based upon the efforts and preparations from these jurisdictions. You can basically think of any major California town, and you'd probably be able to get a copy of their sewer system management plan to review and or emulate at a scale which would be appropriate for your particular sewer agencies. Many of these are online. Many of them are the original documents. Some of the more current ones are from the last 4 or 5 years. Some of the older ones are maybe a decade old. And many of them are all that they're very similar in terms of form and format. Of course, the information contained is appropriate for that particular municipality, but they become a guidance document that you can utilize to try and emulate the creation of your own document. Developing a sewer system management plan is an iterative process. It's not a one and done proposition. You create the plan today. It needs to be under a constant review process, like I say, at least once a year as a good, or every couple of years, review to make sure that it is still appropriate. And if you're in an area, especially where you have growth occurring, it becomes even more imperative to make sure that the new additions to your system are able to handle and are built to the proper standards, and they are not going to become a source of problems down the road. Documentation failures will help identify any problem areas during the self-system audits. And in any event, anything that does occur should be viewed as a training opportunity, allowing you to better improve your sewer system management plan and come up with a document that will serve you for many years to come. Thank you for listening to my presentation on sewer system management plans. I'm sure some of you may have some questions. If you do, you will have a chance to reach out to me by email. There is also supposed to be a live chat scheduled as part of this presentation, so that will be a second way that you can reach me to discuss. Also, we have a white paper that we've written regarding this subject, which kind of summarizes the entire presentation, and a link to that will be presented, so you'll be able to access that at your leisure as well. And I thank you for your attendance.